We're incredibly grateful for your support. Before we begin today's tale, tell us, which city or country are you joining us from? We love connecting with our global audience. Now, let's dive into today's story. Thomas Richardson's weathered fingers traced the familiar scratch on his Casio watch's face, a battle scar from a physics demonstration gone wrong 5 years ago. The digital display read 6:15 a.m., just as it had every morning for the past 15 years. He adjusted the band, slightly loose now from years of faithful service, much like his dedication to this morning routine. Steam rose from the griddle as Thomas poured the carefully measured batter, creating perfect circles of promise. The kitchen, with its dated oak cabinets and slightly chipped countertops, filled with the sweet aroma of blueberries and butter. Each pancake represented a small act of love, a continuation of the thousands of breakfasts he'd prepared in this modest space. The wall calendar caught his eye, a freebie from Riverside High School where he taught physics. Red circles marked important dates, test days, parent-teacher conferences, and Patricia's various church commitments. His finger traced the current date, Wednesday, though nothing special was noted. The thundering footsteps from above signaled Brandon's imminent arrival. Thomas smiled, remembering when those same steps were tiny patters, back when Brandon still thought his father hung the moon and stars, subjects Thomas had taught with passion for over 2 decades. "Morning, Dad." Brandon's voice carried a hint of something that Thomas couldn't quite place. Perhaps disdain, or was it pity? The teenager slid into the kitchen with the grace of someone wearing shoes worth more than Thomas's monthly car payment. Thomas's eyes caught the glint of metal on his son's wrist. "New watch, Brandon?" He tried to keep his tone light, curious rather than concerned. The Rolex gleamed under the kitchen lights, its premium craftsmanship obvious even to Thomas's untrained eye. A replica, surely. These days, teenagers had access to remarkably good knockoffs. Brandon's hand instinctively covered the timepiece. "Just something I saved up for, Dad. You know, from tutoring." He grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl, deliberately avoiding the stack of fresh pancakes. Thomas nodded, though his teacher's instinct tingled. The math didn't add up. Tutoring freshman physics at $20 an hour couldn't possibly. But before he could pursue that thought, Patricia's perfume announced her arrival. His wife of 20 years floated into the kitchen like a vision from a Sunday service, though the calendar clearly showed Wednesday. Her cream-colored dress whispered against the linoleum, pearls catching the morning light. Everything about her seemed too polished for their humble kitchen, as if she'd stepped out of a different life and accidentally wandered in. "Blueberry pancakes again?" Patricia's voice carried that familiar note of distant affection, the kind that had become more common over the past few years. "You're too good to us, Thomas." He placed a plate before her, arranged just as she liked. 3 medium-sized pancakes, butter melting perfectly into the spaces between. "Special recipe for my special girl," he said, recycling a phrase from Happier Mornings. "Another church meeting today?" Patricia's fork pushed the pancakes around, creating the illusion of eating without actually diminishing the stack. "Yes, the youth ministry needs extra hands. Sister Margaret is organizing a new program." She checked her phone, the screen reflecting in her carefully made-up eyes. "Don't wait up tonight." Thomas watched as she took a single bite, then stood to leave. The perfume that surrounded her wasn't her usual department store fragrance. This one carried notes of luxury he couldn't identify. Her heels clicked against the floor, each step taking her further from the life they'd built together. "Mom, can you drop me off at Michael's after school?" Brandon called after her. "We got that study group thing?" "Of course, sweetheart. Don't forget your physics homework. Your father worked so hard on that curriculum." Patricia's voice carried a strange emphasis on "your father," almost like an inside joke Thomas wasn't privy to. The kitchen fell silent save for the soft scrape of Thomas's fork against his plate. He ate methodically, savoring each bite of the breakfast his family had declined. Through the window, he watched Patricia's car back out of the driveway. A newer model than they'd discussed getting, but she'd insisted it was a special lease deal through the church. Brandon lingered, thumbs dancing across his phone screen. "Dad." "Yes, son? Do you ever think about? Don't you want?" Brandon's words trailed off as he glanced at Thomas's Casio watch. "Never mind. I'll be late for first period." Thomas cleaned the kitchen with practiced efficiency, wrapping Patricia's untouched pancakes in plastic wrap and placing them in the fridge alongside similar offerings from previous mornings. The clock on the microwave blinked 7:30, time to leave for school. In the driveway, he paused to look at his reflection in his car window. Salt and pepper hair neatly combed, tie straight, jacket clean if not designer. A physics teacher's salary didn't allow for much extravagance, but he'd always taken pride in presenting himself professionally. His students deserved that much respect. The Casio watch beeped softly, a reminder he'd set years ago to alert him when it was time to head to school. Thomas smiled at the familiar sound, a constant in a world that seemed increasingly unfamiliar. He adjusted the timepiece one final time, the plastic band comfortable against his skin, and climbed into his sensible sedan. As he backed out of the driveway, Thomas caught sight of Mrs. Watson in her garden next door. The elderly neighbor waved, her expression carrying something he couldn't quite read. Was it concern? Pity? But he had equations to write on boards and young minds to shape. Whatever thoughts nagged at the edges of his consciousness would have to wait. The teacher's lounge at Riverside High School had seen better days, but Thomas found comfort in its familiar shabbiness. The coffee maker gurgled in the corner, producing the same mediocre brew it had for the past decade. He stirred his coffee methodically, watching the generic creamer create swirling patterns in the dark liquid. Thomas? Dr. Robert Hayes's voice carried an unusual weight. The behavioral psychologist stood in the doorway, his typically relaxed demeanor replaced by something more guarded. Got a minute? Thomas gestured to the empty chair across from him. The plastic cushion wheezed as Robert sat down, his eyes darting around the room as if checking for eavesdroppers. The behavior seemed odd for a man Thomas had known for 15 years, someone who'd been best man at Brandon's christening. You should come to the country club this weekend, Robert said, his words careful and measured. He fiddled with his tie, a nervous habit Thomas had observed in his friend only during the most serious parent-teacher conferences. Thomas's spoon clinked against his coffee mug. The country club? Robert, you know that's not really my scene. Besides, the membership fees alone. I can get you in as my guest, Robert interrupted, leaning forward. There's something you need to see, Thomas. Something important. Before Thomas could probe further, the lounge door swung open with dramatic force. Veronica Martinez, the Spanish teacher, burst in with the energy of someone carrying breaking news. Her heels clicked rapidly across the linoleum as she made her way to the coffee maker, but her eyes never left Thomas. Did you hear about the donation? Veronica asked, her voice carrying that particular tone teachers used when they knew they had a captive audience. Your brother, Richard Richardson, right? He just donated an entire science wing to Madison Prep. The coffee in Thomas's mouth turned bitter. He swallowed hard, aware of Robert's intense gaze. Is that so? Veronica nodded enthusiastically, her bangles jangling as she stirred her coffee. State-of-the-art everything. Smart boards, 3 new labs, even a planetarium. Must have cost millions. She paused, head tilted like a curious bird. Isn't it interesting? Your brother's so generous with his wealth, yet you've never mentioned him. I didn't even know you had a brother until I saw his name in the paper. Thomas's fingers found the scratch on his Casio watch, tracing it absently. Richard and I, we took different paths. Different paths? Veronica's eyebrows rose. That's putting it mildly. He's practically royalty in the financial district. My husband's firm handles some of his accounts. The numbers are astronomical. She leaned against the counter, warming to her subject. And those children of his are absolutely adorable. The twins just started at Madison Prep, you know? Such a coincidence that they'll be using the science wing their father donated. Robert's chair scraped against the floor as he stood abruptly. Thomas, think about what I said. This weekend, Thomas watched his friend's hasty exit, noting how Robert's shoulders carried tension they hadn't shown moments before. The behavioral psychologist had always been perceptive, sometimes uncomfortably so. You really should talk about your brother more, Veronica continued, seemingly oblivious to the tension. The students would love to know that their physics teacher has such a successful family member. It might make science seem more relevant to their futures. The bell rang. saving Thomas from having to respond. He gathered his empty coffee cup, mind spinning with unwanted calculations. Richard's donation would have cost millions, more money than Thomas would earn in several lifetimes of teaching. The brothers hadn't spoken properly in years, not since that Christmas party where Richard had made those cutting remarks about Thomas's career choice. Patricia must be proud, Veronica called after him as he reached the door. Having married into such a successful family, Thomas paused, hand on the doorframe. My wife's pride has never depended on material things, Veronica. We're quite happy with our life as it is. But as he walked down the hallway toward his classroom, Thomas couldn't shake the image of Brandon's Rolex, gleaming under the kitchen lights. The watch had looked genuine, too genuine for a high school student's replica's budget. And Patricia's new car, her designer dresses, Brandon's sudden interest in spending time at his uncle's house. He shook his head, forcing himself to focus on the day's lesson plan. He had a double period of AP physics coming up, and the students would be expecting him to explain quantum entanglement. The irony of teaching about particles inexplicably linked across space and time wasn't lost on him. Red pen in hand, he methodically worked through a stack of physics quizzes, the familiar rhythm of correcting and commenting providing a sense of normalcy to an increasingly unsettling day. The scratch of pen on paper mingled with the ambient sounds of suburban life. Distant lawnmowers, children playing, the occasional car passing by. Patricia's absence, another church meeting, left the house unusually quiet. Brandon had texted earlier, saying he'd be staying late at Michael's to study, though Thomas couldn't remember the last time his son had actually needed help with schoolwork. The creak of a garden gate drew his attention. Mrs. Dorothy Watson, his elderly neighbor of 15 years, made her way up his walkway with careful steps. Her silver hair caught the evening light, and in her weathered hands, she carried what appeared to be one of her famous apple pies. "Thomas, dear," she called out, her voice carrying the weight of years and wisdom. "I hope I'm not interrupting your work." Thomas set aside his grating, rising to help her navigate the porch steps. "Never too busy for you, Mrs. Watson. And certainly never too busy for one of your pies." The old woman's hands trembled slightly as she passed him the pie. Up close, Thomas noticed the unusual tension in her typically cheerful face. Her eyes, still sharp despite her 80 years, held a mixture of concern and determination. "Let me get you a chair," Thomas offered, but Mrs. Watson shook her head. "No, dear. I need to stand for this." She gripped her walking cane tightly, knuckles white against the worn wood. "I've been watching, you see, for years now. My garden gives me an excellent view of many things." Thomas felt a chill despite the warm evening air. "Would you like to come inside? I can make some coffee to go with the pie." "That's very kind, but no." Mrs. Watson's voice wavered slightly. "I've held my peace for years, Thomas. Told myself it wasn't my place. That perhaps I was seeing things wrong, that my old eyes were playing tricks on me." She paused, looking past Thomas toward Richard's mansion, barely visible through the trees that separated their neighborhoods. The setting sun painted the expensive windows in shades of gold and crimson. "But seeing those children playing in your brother's garden, bearing such a striking resemblance to Brandon." Mrs. Watson's hands trembled more violently now. "I can't stay silent anymore. It's not right, what they're doing to you. Not right at all." Thomas's throat tightened. "Mrs. Watson, I'm not sure I understand." "Oh, you understand more than you let on, dear." She reached out, patting his arm with grandmotherly affection. "I've watched Brandon grow up, watched him play in your yard, learn to ride his bike, become the young man he is today. And now I watch those other children, your brother's children, playing in that massive garden of his." She drew a shaky breath. "The resemblance is, it's impossible to ignore. Especially the youngest one, Sophie. She has Brandon's exact smile, the one he had when he was that age. And your wife's eyes. Exactly your wife's eyes." The red pen slipped from Thomas's fingers, landing soundlessly in the grass below the porch. Mrs. Watson continued, her words tumbling out as if she'd held them back for too long. "I see Patricia's car there, when she's supposed to be at church meetings. Sometimes Brandon visits too, always when you're at school. They have family dinners, your family, Thomas, but without you." Thomas gripped the porch railing, his knuckles white. The wood felt solid beneath his fingers, an anchor in a world that suddenly seemed to be tilting off its axis. "I've documented everything," Mrs. Watson added, her voice stronger now. "Originally, it was just for the Homeowners Association, Richard's garden violations, you see. But over time, well, let's just say I have quite a collection of photographs. Times, dates, license plate numbers. An old woman's hobby, some might say, but..." She reached into her purse, withdrawing a small envelope. "These are copies. I have the originals safe at home. When you're ready to look at them..." She placed the envelope on top of the apple pie, still warm in Thomas's other hand. The sun had nearly set now, painting the sky in deep purples and blues. In the distance, a car door slammed. Patricia returning from her church meeting, right on schedule. "Your Casio keeps perfect time, doesn't it, Thomas?" Mrs. Watson asked suddenly, glancing at his watch. 15 years, you said? Faithful, reliable, honest, rather like its owner. She straightened her spine, summoning dignity. Sometimes the most valuable things aren't the ones that shine the brightest. With that, she turned and made her way back down the walkway, leaving Thomas standing on his porch with a cooling pie, an envelope of secrets, and the weight of unspoken truths pressing down on his shoulders. His Casio watch beeped softly, 7:30 p.m., time for his evening coffee. But for the first time in 15 years, Thomas ignored its faithful reminder. Patricia's heels clicked up the driveway. "Thomas? Why are you standing out here in the dark? And is that one of Mrs. Watson's pies?" He looked at his wife of 20 years, really looked at her, and wondered how many secrets were hidden behind her perfect smile. The envelope seemed to burn against his palm, but he merely nodded. "Yes, dear." She thought we might enjoy it for dessert. The lie tasted bitter on his tongue, but then again, it seemed lies had become the main course in their household lately. He followed Patricia inside, carrying Mrs. Watson's offerings, both the sweet and the bitter, and closed the door on the gathering darkness. The business card in Thomas's hand felt impossibly heavy for such a small piece of paper. Catherine Chen's name was embossed in simple black letters, with "Private Investigator" printed beneath. He remembered her from his AP Physics class 5 years ago, bright, methodical, with an uncanny ability to piece together complex problems. Now, sitting across from her in her modest office, those same analytical eyes studied him with professional detachment. "It's been a while, Mr. Richardson," Catherine said, her desk neat and organized in a way that would have made her teenage self proud. "Though I admit, I never expected to see you here." Thomas placed Mrs. Watson's envelope on the desk between them. The photographs inside had kept him awake for 3 nights straight. "I need your help, Catherine, but what I'm about to share stays between us. Everything that happens in this office is confidential." She leaned forward, her expression softening slightly. "You were there for me when my father passed during senior year. Let me help you now." Thomas spread the photos across her desk. Mrs. Watson's amateur surveillance had captured more than garden violations. Patricia's car parked at Richard's mansion, Brandon entering through the side gate, children playing in the garden whose features stirred uncomfortable questions in Thomas's mind. Catherine examined each photo methodically, making notes in a small black notebook. "When did you first suspect something was wrong?" "I didn't," Thomas admitted, his hand unconsciously touching his Casio watch. "Or maybe I did, but I chose not to see it. The designer clothes, the expensive watch, the frequent church meetings." Speaking of church meetings, Catherine tapped her keyboard, turning her monitor so Thomas could see. "I took the liberty of checking some preliminary records before you arrived. According to the First Baptist Church's public event calendar, there hasn't been a youth ministry meeting on Wednesdays for the past 8 months. Thomas's throat tightened. "But Patricia has been attending Wednesday meetings for 2 years, Catherine finished, pulling up another document. "I also checked her actual attendance records. In the past year, she's only signed in twice, Christmas and Easter." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Thomas gripped the arms of his chair, steadying himself. "How did you get these records?" "The church secretary is my aunt," Catherine explained, her typing never ceasing. "She's been concerned about Patricia's absence, especially given her position on the youth committee. But there's more." She turned to a fresh page in her notebook. I'll need to verify some things. Financial records, property documents, school records. It will take time, and it won't be cheap. Money isn't. Thomas stopped himself, reality crashing back. Actually, money is very much an issue. My teacher's salary. Catherine held up a hand. Consider this repayment for all those extra help sessions before the AP exam. I got into Stanford because of that score, Mr. Richardson. This one's on the house. As if on cue, Thomas's phone buzzed. A text from Brandon, staying at Michael's again. Study group. Catherine's eyes narrowed at his expression. May I? She held out her hand for the phone. Thomas hesitated only a moment before handing it over. Catherine typed rapidly on her computer, her frown deepening. Michael Torres, right? According to his social media, he's been in Mexico with his family for the past week. School-approved absence for his sisters Quincy and Era. The betrayal felt like a physical blow. Thomas remembered breakfast that morning, watching Brandon push away the pancakes he'd made. His son's voice drifted back to him, carrying new weight. Uncle Richard's practically my real father anyway. Did I say that out loud? Thomas asked, seeing Catherine's expression. No, she said softly. But I heard it too, at the coffee shop near Richard's house last week. I was there on another case when Brandon came in with his friends. She hesitated before continuing. He was quite vocal about his feelings. Thomas's hands felt cold. Tell me. Catherine shook her head. You don't need those details right now. What you need is evidence. Facts. Let me do my job, Mr. Richardson. She turned back to her computer, fingers flying over the keyboard. 3 children live at Richard's address. Twins Alice and Adam, age 12, and Sophie, who's 9. I can get their birth certificates, but it'll take a few days. Preliminary property records show the house is technically owned by a trust, with both Richard and Patricia listed as trustees. Thomas's head snapped up. Patricia? But that house was purchased 5 years ago. We were already married. Yes. Catherine's voice was gentle, but professional. The trust was established 14 years ago, shortly after Brandon's 3rd birthday. The implications hit Thomas like a physical blow. 14 years. His entire marriage, everything he thought he knew about his family, began unraveling with each word Catherine spoke. There's one more thing, Catherine said, pulling up another document. Brandon's college applications. They were submitted last week, with glowing letters of recommendation attached. One from Richard, detailing Brandon's extensive internship at his firm. During hours when he was supposedly at study group, Thomas stood abruptly, needing to move, to think, to breathe. Through the office window, he could see the high school where he taught, where he'd built a life around educating other people's children while his own son. I'll need a few days to compile everything, Catherine said, her voice pulling him back. But Mr. Richardson, be careful. People who've been living a lie for this long, they don't react well when the truth starts coming out. Thomas nodded, reaching for his worn briefcase. His hand brushed against the stack of physics tests he still needed to grade, reminders of the normal life he'd been living just days ago. Catherine? He paused at the door. Thank you. She smiled, but her eyes were serious. Don't thank me yet, Mr. Richardson. The truth can be a heavy burden to carry. As Thomas left her office, his phone buzzed again. A message from Patricia. Church meeting running late. Don't wait up. He stared at the message until the screen went dark, reflecting his tired face back at him. The Casio watch on his wrist beeped softly. Time for his afternoon classes. At least physics still made sense. For now, that would have to be enough. The faculty meeting room hummed with the usual end-of-day chatter, but Thomas barely heard it. His mind was still processing Catherine's latest email, delivered during his last period. Photographs of Patricia and Richard at the country club, their body language speaking volumes. Robert's strange behavior suddenly made terrible sense. Thomas? Robert's voice cut through his thoughts. The behavioral psychologist stood by his chair, tension visible in every line of his body. Can we talk? Privately? The other teachers were filing out, their conversations fading down the hallway. Thomas remained seated, his fingers tracing the familiar scratch on his watch face. About what you saw at the country club? Robert's sharp intake of breath confirmed everything. How did you? No. Thomas's laugh held no humor. Let's just say I've had a crash course in investigation lately. Sit down, Robert. Tell me what you've been trying to tell me for weeks. Robert sank into the chair next to him, his usual professional composure cracking. I didn't want to believe it at first. Patricia and Richard, they were always close, in-laws, you know? But then I started noticing patterns. The way they'd meet when you were teaching. How comfortable Brandon was there. Like it was his second home. Third home, Thomas corrected quietly. His second home is supposedly Michael Torres's house. Except Michael's been in Mexico for a week, and Brandon's been studying there every night. Jesus, Thomas. Robert ran a hand through his graying hair. I should have told you sooner. But Sophie, she looks so much like Brandon did at that age. The same smile, the same way of tilting her head when she's thinking. I used to do behavioral assessments at the country club's summer program. You know, that's how I first noticed. Thomas's hands clenched under the table. Tell me everything, Robert. No more protecting me. For the next hour, Robert talked. He described the intimate lunches, the family gatherings where Thomas was conspicuously absent, the way Brandon called Richard Dad when he thought no one was listening. Each word felt like another brick added to the wall being built between Thomas and the life he thought he knew. The worst part, Robert concluded, his voice hoarse, is how they laugh about it. Like it's some clever joke they're all in on. Even Brandon. The door opened, interrupting Robert's confession. Brandon stood there, designer backpack slung carelessly over one shoulder. Dad? What are you still doing here? I thought you'd be home by now. Thomas looked at his son, really looked at him. The expensive clothes, the Rolex watch, the confident stance that spoke of privilege beyond a teacher's salary. Funny, I thought you were at Michael's. Studying? Brandon's face flickered, but his recovery was smooth. Change of plans. Uncle Richard needed help with some investment research. He says I have a natural talent for Michael's in Mexico. Thomas's voice was quiet but firm. Has been all week. Want to try again? The silence stretched between them, heavy with 17 years of lies. Robert stood quietly, squeezing Thomas's shoulder before leaving father and son alone in the increasingly shadowy room. You don't understand, Brandon finally said, his voice carrying an edge of desperation. Uncle Richard, he sees my potential. He knows I'm meant for more than this. He gestured around the modest school building. More than what, Brandon? More than teaching? More than helping young minds understand the universe. Thomas's voice remained steady, though his heart was breaking. More than wearing a 15-year-old Casio watch. At least Uncle Richard cares about success. Brandon's composure shattered. You're satisfied being mediocre, wearing that pathetic watch while we could have had everything. Do you know what it's like? Watching other kids at school get whatever they want, while my father grades papers for minimum wage. I make more than minimum wage, Thomas said softly, and you've never wanted for necessities. Necessities? Brandon laughed bitterly. Is that what you call those bargain store clothes you bought me until Uncle Richard stepped in? Those public park birthday parties while my friends had their celebrations at the country club? Each word landed like a physical blow, but Thomas forced himself to remain calm. And when did Richard start stepping in, Brandon? When did he become more of a father to you than I am? Brandon's face closed off, the familiar teenage mask sliding back into place. You wouldn't understand. You've never understood. Uncle Richard says. Your Uncle Richard, Thomas interrupted, standing slowly, has been lying to you your entire life. And so has your mother. The color drained from Brandon's face. What are you talking about? The twins, Brandon. Sophie. Have you never wondered why they look so much like you? Brandon took a step back, his designer shoes squeaking on the linoleum. You don't know what you're talking about. You're just jealous because Uncle Richard succeeded while you stayed stuck in this mediocrity. Mediocrity. Thomas tasted the word. Is that what they call integrity these days? Honesty? Loyalty? Loyalty? Brandon's laugh was ugly. Like mom's loyalty? Haven't you ever wondered why she spends so much time at church meetings? God, you're so blind. So pathetically blind. The words hung in the air between them, impossible to take back. Brandon's eyes widened as he realized what he'd revealed, but his chin came up defiantly. At least Uncle Richard isn't afraid to take what he wants. To be who he is. And who is he, Brandon? Who is Richard Richardson really? Thomas's voice was gentle now, teacher gentle, the voice he used when guiding students through particularly difficult concepts. Because from where I stand, he's a man who stole his brother's wife, lied about his children's parentage, and corrupted a teenager's understanding of what really matters in life. Brandon's hand went to his Rolex, a nervous tell Thomas had noticed but never understood until now. You don't know anything. You're just a teacher. Just a nothing. The words should have hurt more than they did, but Thomas felt an odd sense of calm. I know that watch you're wearing cost more than 3 months of my salary. I know you haven't been to a real study group in months. And I know that the twins and Sophie are your half-siblings, not your cousins. Brandon's face went from pale to ashen. You're lying? Am I? Ask your mother. Ask your precious Uncle Richard. Ask them about the trust they set up 14 years ago, or about the birth certificates Catherine Shun is currently investigating. You hired an investigator? For the first time, Brandon looked shaken. Does Mom know? Does it matter? Thomas gathered his papers, sliding them into his worn briefcase. The truth has a way of coming out, Brandon. The only question is whether you want to be on the side of truth when it does. He walked to the door, pausing beside his son. Brandon stood frozen, the afternoon sun through the windows highlighting how young he still was, how lost beneath all that expensive armor. I'll be home when you're ready to talk, Thomas said quietly. Really talk. About everything. Dad. Brandon's voice cracked, suddenly sounding like the little boy who used to beg for bedtime stories about the stars. I didn't mean... Yes, you did. Thomas checked his Casio watch, a habit of decades. But that's okay. Sometimes we have to lose everything to understand what really matters. He left Brandon standing in the empty classroom, surrounded by physics equations that suddenly seemed far simpler than the complicated reality of their lives. As he walked to his car, his phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. New information. Meet tomorrow? Thomas typed a simple reply. Yes. Then he drove home to wait for his wife, wondering if she'd even bother with the church meeting excuse tonight. The invitation arrived on expensive cream-colored paper, gold lettering catching the morning light. Thomas stared at it over his cooling coffee, the familiar routine of making breakfast forgotten for the first time in years. A birthday celebration in honor of Thomas Richardson, it read. The country club cordially invites you. Patricia had arranged it all. She'd told him that morning before rushing off to another meeting. A surprise, she claimed, though the invitation's arrival had spoiled that pretense. What struck Thomas most was the guest list. His students, past and present, prominently mentioned as special invitees. His phone buzzed. Catherine again. They'd been meeting regularly over the past week, each new revelation adding another crack to the foundation of his marriage. Her message was brief but urgent. Need to meet. New information. Important. The cafe they'd chosen was deliberately far from both the school and Richard's neighborhood. Catherine was already waiting, a thick folder on the table before her. Her expression told Thomas everything he needed to know. They're planning to serve you divorce papers, she said without preamble. At the party, in front of everyone, Thomas set down his coffee cup carefully, preventing the trembling in his hands from showing. How did you find out? The law firm Richard uses isn't as discreet as they think. One of their junior partners drinks at my brother's bar. Catherine opened the folder, revealing documents that blurred before Thomas's eyes. They've been planning this for months. The party, the public humiliation, all of it. Richard's idea, apparently. Of course it was. Thomas's laugh held no humor. He always did have a flair for the dramatic. The students, that was a nice touch. Make sure my humiliation has the widest possible audience. Catherine's expression softened slightly. There's more. The divorce papers, they're brutal. They're painting you as negligent, career-obsessed, emotionally unavailable. They've got statements from Brandon about feeling abandoned in favor of your students. Brandon agreed to this? According to my source, he signed his statement last week. Right after. She didn't need to finish. Right after their confrontation in the classroom. Thomas's watch beeped. Lunch period was ending. He'd need to return to school soon, face his students, teach them about motion and energy and the immutable laws of physics. Laws that made so much more sense than the chaos of human hearts. The party's in 3 days, Catherine said, gathering her papers. What are you going to do? Thomas stared at his reflection in the cafe window, seeing beyond it to the school where he dedicated his life to teaching, where his students waited to learn about the predictability of physics in an unpredictable world. Richard always loved an audience, Thomas said quietly. He'd throw these elaborate parties in college, make sure everyone was watching when he made his grand gestures. His fingers traced the scratch on his Casio's face. But he never did understand that some equations don't solve the way you expect them to. Catherine's professional mask slipped slightly, showing concern. Mr. Richardson, they've planned everything. The timing, the venue, the witnesses. They've even invited journalists from the local paper. Richard's contacts, of course. Of course. Thomas nodded. My brother always did believe money could buy the truth. The divorce papers, Catherine continued. They're demanding full custody of Brandon, citing your emotional neglect and financial irresponsibility as primary factors. They've even included documentation of Brandon's improved academic performance since spending more time at Richard's house. The cafe seemed to grow smaller, the walls closing in with each revelation. Thomas remembered Brandon's words from their confrontation. Uncle Richard says, I have a natural talent. How long had they been planning this? How many years had his brother been orchestrating his downfall? There's something else, Catherine said, hesitation clear in her voice. The twins and Sophie. Richard's planning to announce their adoption at the party. He's got the papers ready, making everything official. A new family narrative to counter any complications that might arise. Thomas felt the weight of Mrs. Watson's photographs in his briefcase. The evidence of years of deception, captured by an elderly neighbor's careful documentation of garden violations. The truth hidden in plain sight, just like the physics principles he taught his students. Obvious once you knew what to look for. 3 days, he repeated. The party's in 3 days. Catherine nodded, concerned by his calm demeanor. Mr. Richardson, maybe we should consider legal options. I know some attorneys who— No, Thomas interrupted gently. No attorneys. Not yet. But they're going to blindside you. In front of your students, your colleagues, everyone. Thomas stood, gathering his worn briefcase. The weight of student papers inside reminded him of his responsibilities, of the young minds waiting for him to explain how the universe worked. Thank you, Catherine. For everything. He managed a small smile. I need to get back to class. We're covering Newton's third law today. The action-reaction principle? Catherine frowned, remembering her physics lessons. Mr. Richardson, this isn't the time for. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction, Thomas quoted softly. Richard never did pay attention in physics class. He was too busy planning his next big show. He left Catherine staring after him, concern etched on her face. The walk back to school gave him time to think, to plan, to remember every lesson he'd learned about patience and precision in his years of teaching. His phone buzzed again, Patricia, confirming the party details. The message ended with, "It'll be a night to remember." On that point, at least they agreed. Thomas entered his classroom, where his students waited with their questions about forces and reactions, about causes and effects. He looked at their eager faces, some of whom would be witnesses to his planned humiliation in 3 days' time. Today, he began, his voice steady, we're going to learn about how every action in the universe creates an equal and opposite reaction, about how nothing happens in isolation, and how every force we apply comes back to us in ways we might not expect. He glanced at his Casio watch, the faithful timekeeper of countless lessons. 3 days. Richard had planned everything perfectly, every detail orchestrated for maximum impact. But Thomas had learned long ago that the most important lessons often came from unexpected directions. The watch beeped again, marking the hour. Thomas began his lesson on Newton's third law, each word carrying a weight his students couldn't yet understand. In 3 days, they would all learn about actions and reactions in ways their physics textbooks never covered. The newsroom of the Daily Chronicle hummed with the familiar energy of approaching deadlines. James Crawford's desk stood out for its methodical organization, a habit he developed years ago in Mr. Richardson's physics class. The investigative journalist glanced at the framed article on his wall, his first major exposé, inspired by a lesson on chain reactions Thomas Richardson had taught him a decade ago. The phone on his desk rang, displaying a number he hadn't seen in years. "Mr. Richardson?" James's voice carried surprise and warmth. "It's been ages." "James?" Thomas's voice sounded older than James remembered, weighted with something beyond mere years. "I need your help with a story. One that requires your particular talent for uncovering the truth." For the next hour, Thomas laid out the facts. Years of deception, a brother's betrayal, a wife's infidelity, and children whose very existence revealed a web of lies. James's recorder captured every detail, but his notepad filled with observations the machine couldn't record, the controlled pain in his former teacher's voice, the precision with which he presented each piece of evidence. "I've been documenting everything," Thomas explained. "Every suspicious bank transfer, every unexplained absence, every sudden acquisition of luxury items. Brandon's new watch alone cost more than my annual classroom supply budget." James studied the financial records Thomas had emailed. These transfers between Richard's accounts and Patricia's hidden ones. They create a clear pattern. And the timing coincides with the birth of each child, Thomas finished. "Yes, the twins 12 years ago, then Sophie 9 years ago. Each time, a substantial transfer, followed by property adjustments. But this is bigger than just a family scandal," James noted, investigative instincts firing. "The way Richard's been moving company funds, using corporate resources for personal matters. The board would be very interested in this." A light knock interrupted them. Catherine Chun stood in the doorway, holding a thick folder. "Sorry I'm late. Traffic was—" She stopped, recognizing James. "Crawford? From AP Physics, right? Third row. Always asking about real-world applications." James grinned. "And you were first row, correcting the textbook's equations. I've got something better than equations now." Catherine spread photographs across James's desk. Mrs. Watson's documentation. She'd been photographing Richard's garden violations for the HOA, but she captured so much more. Times, dates, license plates. She's got 15 years of evidence here. Mrs. Watson herself had arrived with Catherine, her elderly frame belying her sharp mind. "I noted everything in my garden journal," she explained, producing a worn notebook. "Force of habit from my days as a research librarian. The garden violations were just the beginning. I saw patterns developing. Patricia's car appearing at Richard's house when Thomas was teaching, Brandon's secret visits, the children playing in the garden." James examined the photos, journalist's eyes catching crucial details. "These timestamps, the regular patterns of visits, and you've got clear shots of Richard and Patricia together, years before they claimed their relationship began. The Board of Education might also be interested," Catherine added. Richard's donation to Madison Prep came with some interesting conditions. Preferential treatment for family members, including Brandon's guaranteed acceptance. Thomas sat quietly, watching his former students work. James recognized the expression, the same one Mr. Richardson wore when guiding students toward a key discovery. "We'll need to move fast," James said, already drafting outlines in his head. "The party's in 2 days. Richard's planning to serve divorce papers there, right? Making a public spectacle?" "Classic Richard," Thomas nodded. "He always did love an audience. But he never did understand that every action has an equal and opposite reaction." James and Catherine finished in unison, sharing a grin. "Some lessons stuck with you." Mrs. Watson adjusted her glasses, studying a particularly damning photograph. "I've lived next door to Thomas for 15 years. Watched him grade papers on his porch, teach Brandon about the stars, keep that faithful routine despite everything. And all this time, right over my garden wall." "We'll need statements," James said, professional mode engaging. "Mrs. Watson, your documentation is crucial. Catherine, can you compile everything from your investigation? Bank records, property documents, school records?" "Already done." Catherine patted her folder. "Including evidence of Richard using company funds for personal expenses, private school tuition, property maintenance, even Brandon's Rolex. All technically listed as corporate gifts, but the paper trail tells a different story." Thomas touched his own watch, the faithful Casio that had become such a point of contention. "What's our next step?" James was already typing rapidly. "I'll have the preliminary article ready tomorrow. We'll need to coordinate the timing perfectly. Richard wants a public revelation? Let's give him one he won't expect. Mrs. Watson's hand trembled slightly as she signed her statement. Thomas, dear, are you sure you want all this made public? The children deserve the truth, Thomas said quietly. All of them. Brandon, the twins, Sophie. They've lived with lies long enough. Catherine's phone buzzed. Another text from her source at Richard's law firm. They've finished the divorce papers. They're planning to serve them right after Richard announces the twins and Sophie's adoption. Perfect timing, James said, a plan forming. Mrs. Watson's photos prove those aren't adoptions at all. And I've got sources at the courthouse who can fast-track DNA test orders. Thomas stood by the window, watching the newsroom bustle below. 15 years of teaching physics, he mused, trying to help students understand how every action has consequences, how the truth of the universe can't be hidden by clever lies or expensive distractions. You taught us more than physics, Mr. Richardson, James said quietly. You taught us about integrity, about standing up for truth, even when it's difficult. Catherine nodded, adding another document to their growing pile of evidence. You taught us that real value isn't measured by price tags or social status. Mrs. Watson reached over, patting Thomas's hand. You taught all of us, dear. And now it's time for Richard to learn a few lessons of his own. The next 48 hours would change everything. As James began writing the article that would shatter carefully constructed facades, Thomas felt a strange peace settle over him. The truth, like the laws of physics he'd taught for so many years, had a way of making itself known. His Casio watch beeped. Time for his afternoon classes. Even with his world unraveling, he had students waiting to learn about the immutable laws that governed their universe. Some constants remained trustworthy, even when everything else proved false. Tomorrow, then, he said, gathering his papers. At the party, James nodded, already immersed in his draft. Catherine returned to her files, double-checking every detail. Mrs. Watson clutched her garden journal, years of careful observations about to serve a purpose she'd never imagined. The truth, like dawn, was about to break. And none of them, not Patricia, not Richard, not even Brandon, would be able to hide from its light. The country club ballroom gleamed with calculated opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across white-clothed tables, each place setting worth more than Thomas's monthly salary. Richard had spared no expense. This was, after all, meant to be his moment of triumph. Patricia stood near the entrance, resplendent in a designer dress Thomas had never seen before. She greeted guests with practiced charm, every inch the gracious hostess. Behind her, Richard worked the room with the confidence of a man who believed money could buy anything, even truth. Brandon hovered between them, his Rolex catching the light as he fidgeted. The teenager's eyes kept darting to the door, watching as his father's students filed in, their modest party clothes contrasting sharply with the venue's grandeur. Quite a turnout, Robert Hayes murmured, materializing at Thomas's side. The behavioral psychologist surveyed the room with professional interest. Richard's arranged everything perfectly, hasn't he? The witnesses, the timing, the social pressure. Not quite everything, Thomas replied quietly. Catherine Chun arrived next, her professional attire drawing curious glances from the country club regulars. She carried her ever-present folder, but tonight it contained more than just investigation notes. Mrs. Watson made an unexpected entrance, her simple floral dress and determined expression causing Patricia to falter mid-greeting. The elderly neighbor clutched her garden journal like a shield, nodding politely as she made her way to Thomas's side. James Crawford was the last to arrive, press credentials visible on his lapel. He carried a leather briefcase that drew Richard's immediate attention, similar to the one Richard's lawyer held, supposedly containing divorce papers. Thomas! Richard's voice boomed across the room, perfectly calibrated to carry. Brother, man of the hour. He approached with arms spread wide, every inch the generous sibling. I hope you don't mind. I took the liberty of arranging this little celebration. After all, how often does my only brother turn 53? The room's attention focused on them, exactly as Richard had planned. Thomas noted his brother's designer watch, its price tag probably equivalent to a year's worth of classroom supplies. Actually, Thomas said mildly, I'm 52. A flicker of annoyance crossed Richard's face. Always the precise one, weren't you? Speaking of precision, he gestured to his lawyer, who stepped forward with practiced timing. I have something rather important to announce. Patricia moved closer, her smile fixed but her eyes wary. Brandon took half a step toward Richard, then stopped, uncertainty visible beneath his practiced confidence. First, Richard continued, playing to his audience, I'd like to introduce some very special people. He beckoned, and 3 children emerged from the crowd, the twins, Alice and Adam, holding hands, and little Sophie trailing behind. Many of you know them as my adopted children. But tonight, I'm making it official. The papers are ready. Are they? James's voice cut through the theatrics. The journalist stepped forward, his own briefcase open. That's interesting because I have some papers of my own. Catherine moved to flank Thomas, her folder open. Mrs. Watson's garden journal lay ready in her weathered hands. Robert stood straighter, years of observing human behavior about to serve a new purpose. What is this? Richard's smile hardened. Thomas, if this is some attempt to... To what, Richard? Thomas asked quietly. To uncover the truth? About the children? About the money? About 15 years of lies? Patricia's perfect composure cracked. Thomas, don't what? Mrs. Watson's voice carried the weight of years of observation. Don't reveal what we've all seen? What we've all documented? James began distributing copies of his exposé, each page filled with carefully verified facts. Mrs. Watson's photographs spilled across a nearby table, years of methodical documentation impossible to dismiss. Catherine's financial records painted a picture no amount of money could erase. The ballroom fell silent as realization spread. Thomas's students, meant to witness his humiliation, instead watched a different kind of lesson unfold. One about truth, consequences, and the physics principle that every action generates an equal and opposite reaction. Richard's lawyer opened his briefcase, divorce papers ready. But it was Thomas who spoke first, his teacher's voice carrying effortlessly through the stunned silence. You arranged quite a show, Richard, he said, fingering his faithful Casio. But you forgot the most important lesson from our school days. The one about actions and consequences. About truth and time. The chandeliers continued to sparkle. The party he'd orchestrated was indeed turning out to be unforgettable, just not in the way he'd intended. The community's reaction was swift and merciless. James's exposé spread through the crowd like wildfire, hushed whispers growing into open discussions. Church leaders who had championed Patricia's devotion now huddled in corners, their faces dark with disappointment. Business associates who had praised Richard's acumen began making discreet phone calls, distancing themselves from the unfolding scandal. Richard's company board members, several of whom were present at the party, gathered in a tight circle around James's documentation of misappropriated funds. The numbers told a damning story. Company resources diverted for personal use, corporate gifts that masked years of deception, educational trusts that raised serious ethical questions. These allegations are ridiculous, Richard blustered, but his voice had lost its usual authority. Thomas is just jealous. He's always been jealous of my success. Success built on lies, Catherine interjected, spreading bank statements across a pristine white tablecloth. Every major deposit coincides with the birth of a child. Your children, Richard. Or should I say, Thomas's children? Patricia sank into a nearby chair, her designer dress suddenly seeming more like costume than clothing. You don't understand, she whispered. We never meant to get caught. Mrs. Watson's voice carried decades of quiet observation. Dear, I watched you build this web of deception from my garden. Watched those children grow, carrying Thomas's features plain as day. Did you really think the truth would stay buried forever? Brandon stood frozen between his parents, all 3 of them. His Rolex caught the light as his hand trembled. Dad, he started, then stopped, seemingly unsure which man he was addressing. Thomas looked at his son, seeing past the expensive clothes to the confused child beneath. The prestigious college acceptance you were so proud of, he said gently. Did you ever wonder why Uncle Richard's recommendation carried so much weight? One of Richard's board members stepped forward, face grim. The company will need to launch a full investigation. Richard, I suggest you contact your lawyer. Your real lawyer, not this divorce specialist. The divorce papers lay forgotten in the briefcase, overshadowed by James's damning report. The journalist had done his job thoroughly, connecting every dot, verifying every detail. The story would run in tomorrow's paper, but its impact was already rippling through the ballroom. What about the children? Patricia's voice cracked. Alice, Adam, Sophie, they don't deserve this. No, they don't, Thomas agreed. They deserve the truth. They deserve to know their real father. And they deserve better than being used as props in Richard's grand performances. The twins, who had been holding hands throughout the confrontation, looked at Thomas with new understanding. Sophie, 9 years old and perceptive beyond her years, studied his face as if seeing it for the first time. The school board members present exchanged significant looks. One approached Thomas, hand extended. We may have been short-sighted in our appreciation of true educational value. Perhaps it's time for new leadership in the science department. Thomas's students, scattered throughout the ballroom, watched their teacher with growing respect. The lesson unfolding before them wasn't about physics, but it was perhaps the most important one he'd ever teach, about integrity, consequences, and the immutable nature of truth. Brandon's college acceptance letter fell from his pocket as he stumbled toward Thomas. Dad, the things I said were born from lies you'd been fed your whole life, Thomas finished. He opened his arms, and suddenly his 17-year-old son was hugging him, designer clothes and all. The divorce still happened, but not as Richard had scripted. Thomas's terms were clear and fair, backed by evidence that gave him considerable leverage. Patricia's carefully constructed social standing crumbled as the truth emerged, but Thomas ensured she wasn't left destitute, more for the children's sake than hers. DNA tests confirmed what Mrs. Watson's photographs had suggested. All 4 children were Thomas's. The custody arrangements were complex, but necessary. The twins and Sophie began spending weekends at their real father's house, discovering that love didn't require expensive gifts or grand gestures. Richard's company board's investigation revealed more than just personal indiscretions. His financial empire, built partially on deception, began to show cracks. The science wing donation to Madison Prep was quietly renamed, the plaque replaced with one celebrating educational excellence rather than individual glory. Months later, Thomas sat in Mrs. Watson's garden, watching his expanded family interact. Brandon, humbled by events but stronger for them, helped Sophie with her science homework. The twins played chess on a set Thomas had found at a garage sale. Their laughter carried no price tag, their joy measured in moments rather than material wealth. His Casio watch, still faithful after all these years, beeped its familiar reminder. Time for grading papers, keeping the routine that had anchored him through the storm. But now the routine included more. 4 children's schedules to track, family dinners to plan, real relationships to nurture. More tea, dear? Mrs. Watson offered, her garden journal still close at hand, though now it recorded happier observations. Thank you, Thomas smiled, touching his watch. You know, Brandon asked me yesterday why I still wear this old thing. Want to know what I told him? What did you say? That some things prove their worth through faithfulness rather than flash, through quiet consistency rather than grand gestures. He looked at his children, all of them, playing in the fading sunlight. Some things are valuable precisely because they remain true, year after year, regardless of fashion or fortune. Mrs. Watson nodded, understanding. Her garden had taught her similar lessons about patience, about truth, about the way things grow stronger when properly tended. The physics teacher who had seemed mediocre to his son now headed the science department, his quiet dedication recognized at last. But more importantly, he had taught his most vital lesson, that true worth couldn't be measured in dollars or status, that integrity and love were the real measure of a life well lived. His expanded family gathered regularly in Mrs. Watson's garden, the observation post turned sanctuary. Brandon, no longer wearing the Rolex, had discovered that time measured in love was far more precious than time measured in gold. The siblings bonded over shared features and shared stories, building connections that no amount of money could buy. The Casio watch beeped again. Time to head in, papers to grade, lessons to plan. But now the routine included helping four children understand not just the laws of physics, but the deeper truths about love, forgiveness, and the real meaning of wealth. Thomas Richardson, the faithful husband who had become something more, a father 4 times over, a teacher in ways he'd never imagined, adjusted his watch one last time and smiled. Some equations he had learned solved themselves in unexpected ways, yielding results far richer than anyone could have calculated. Epilogue. 5 years later, Mrs. Watson's garden, where the old observation post had transformed into something far more meaningful. The rose bushes that once concealed her careful documentation now provided a backdrop for family photographs. Real ones this time. Honest moments captured without secrets or lies. Thomas Richardson stood at the grill, his faithful Casio watch keeping time as always. At 57, his salt and pepper hair had turned mostly silver, but his eyes retained their kindness, perhaps even warmer now after weathering life's storms. As head of the science department at Riverside High, he'd transformed the curriculum, emphasizing integrity in research alongside scientific principles. Brandon, now 22 and home from college, helped set up tables for their monthly family gathering. He traded his Rolex for a simple digital watch years ago, though the lesson had cost more than any timepiece. His acceptance to Stanford had come the second time around, earned through genuine merit rather than Richard's connections. "Dad," Brandon called out, adjusting a tablecloth, "Sophie's science project needs your input." "Something about quantum entanglement?" Sophie, 14 now, and showing the same academic inclination as her biological father, had spread her notes across one of the picnic tables. The twins, Alice and Adam, both 17, were helping their younger sister, their own experiences with physics homework making them patient tutors. The garden party was a monthly tradition now, though the path to this peace hadn't been easy. The aftermath of that fateful night at the country club had rippled through their community for years. Richard Richardson's carefully constructed empire had crumbled spectacularly. The company board's investigation revealed more than personal indiscretions. Years of financial manipulation came to light. His legal team couldn't save him from securities fraud charges. The man who once commanded boardrooms now taught basic finance classes in the minimum security prison where he'd spend the next decade. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The brother who'd mocked Thomas's teaching career now struggled to engage disinterested inmates in the fundamentals of financial literacy. His designer watches had been auctioned to pay restitution, his mansion sold to settle debts. The science wing that once bore his name at Madison Prep now honored dedicated educators who'd served without fanfare. Patricia's fall from grace had been equally profound, though different in nature. The church community's rejection hit hardest. Decades of lies about her involvement in youth ministry couldn't be undone. She'd moved to Arizona, where her parents lived, attempting to rebuild some semblance of life. Monthly alimony checks from Thomas provided stability, though the amount reflected justice rather than revenge. Her relationship with the children remained complicated. Brandon had taken years to forgive her, their reconciliation tentative and ongoing. The twins maintained polite distance, occasional phone calls marking birthdays and holidays. Sophie, too young to fully grasp the betrayal when it happened, showed more openness to connection, though their interactions remained supervised. James Crawford's expose had won multiple journalism awards, launching his career into national prominence. He still guest lectured in Thomas's physics classes, teaching students about the intersection of scientific integrity and investigative reporting. His original article hung framed in Thomas's classroom, alongside Newton's laws, a different kind of lesson about actions and reactions. Catherine Chen's private investigation firm specialized now in family justice cases. She developed a scholarship program for children affected by family deception, naming Thomas as honorary chairman. The program emphasized character over credentials, substance over style. Robert Hayes had retired from teaching, but still consulted for the school district. His behavioral insights helped develop programs supporting students through family crises. The country club where he'd first observed Patricia and Richard's betrayal had closed. Financial mismanagement, ironically, had been converted into a community center. Mrs. Watson, now 85, remained the heart of their gathered family. Her garden journals, once evidence of deception, now recorded happier observations. Brandon's graduation, the twins' first driving lessons, Sophie's science fair victories. She testified against Richard at his trial, her meticulous documentation proving crucial to the prosecution. The garden remembers everything, she often said, tending her roses with the same care she'd once used to document betrayal. But it also forgives, offering new growth each spring. The Homeowners Association had named a community service award after her, celebrating residents who upheld neighborhood integrity. Richard's garden violations seemed trivial now, but they'd been the thread that unraveled his carefully woven deceptions. Thomas's promotion to department head had come with an unexpected bonus. The school board, embarrassed by their past preference for Richard's flashy donations, had established the Richardson Teaching Excellence Fund. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The mediocre brother's name now supported genuine educational achievement. The fund provided classroom supplies, educational technology, and professional development opportunities. Teachers no longer needed wealthy donors to provide basic resources. Thomas ensured every grant application was evaluated on merit alone, remembering how external appearances had once masked internal rot. Brandon's journey from entitled teenager to thoughtful adult had been particularly profound. After losing his first college acceptance, he'd spent a year working as a teacher's aide in Thomas's classroom. The experience transformed him. Now studying education at Stanford, he planned to teach physics himself, wearing his simple watch with pride. The twins had processed their history differently. Alice channeled her experience into psychology studies, planning to help other children of deceptive families. Adam found healing in art, his sculptures exploring themes of truth and perception. Both had chosen to use Thomas's surname, a decision that spoke volumes about legitimacy versus legality. Sophie, the youngest, carried less direct trauma, but more questions. Her academic brilliance reminded many of Thomas, though she'd inherited Patricia's artistic eye. She split holidays between Arizona and home, learning to navigate the complexity of loving imperfect parents. The custody arrangements had evolved naturally as the children aged. The court's rigid schedules gave way to organic family connections. Richard's imprisonment simplified things legally, while Patricia's move created geographical boundaries that somehow made emotional ones easier to navigate. Thomas's classroom became a sanctuary for students facing their own family challenges. His experience lent authenticity to his counsel about integrity and self-worth. The Casio watch, still keeping perfect time, became a teaching tool, a tangible reminder that value isn't measured in gold or status. The criminal justice system hadn't been kind to Richard. Beyond the financial crimes, evidence emerged of broader corporate misconduct. Former associates, seeking leniency, revealed patterns of manipulation extending beyond family deception. His sentence reflected not just financial fraud, but the human cost of his actions. Patricia's attempt to rebuild in Arizona yielded mixed results. Church communities proved hesitant, her history following her despite geographical distance. She found work as an art teacher at a small private school, the reduced circumstances a daily reminder of choices made and trust broken. Yet Thomas had ensured she wasn't destitute. The divorce settlement, while just hadn't been vindictive, he understood that their children's well-being partially depended on their mother's stability. Monthly payments arrived reliably, each one marked for the children's sake. The broader community had healed too, though scars remained. The country club's closure marked the end of an era, pretense giving way to authenticity. The community center that replaced it offered programs for families in crisis, turning a symbol of exclusivity into one of support. Back in the present, Thomas checked his watch, dinner time approaching. The garden filled with familiar faces. Brandon discussing teaching strategies with James Crawford, Catherine Chin sharing case insights with Alice, Adam showing his latest sculptures to Mrs. Watson. Sophie's quantum entanglement project had drawn a small crowd, her enthusiasm for physics reminding everyone of a younger Thomas. "Time to eat," Thomas called out, his teacher's voice carrying easily across the garden. The family gathered, not the one he'd expected to have, but the one truth had given him. The faithful Casio beeped its dinner alert, right on schedule. Mrs. Watson raised her glass in their traditional toast, to truth in all seasons. The garden echoed with genuine laughter, honest conversations, and the sound of healing completed and lessons learned. Above them, the autumn sun painted everything in gold, not the false gold of Richard's promises, but the true gold of authenticity finally achieved. Thomas adjusted his watch one final time, though it needed no correction. Some things, he learned, remained reliable through all of life's changes. Truth, like time, kept its own perfect schedule. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.